I'm sorry about the late hour. Now, we did discuss this earlier today, and so I just want to confirm that we still have the legal officials in the building if we need them.
We do.
Okay, but we now have effectively the people who are working on the task force.
We do.
And that's you, Ms Wilson, is it?
Secretary Helen Wilson, Deputy Secretary, Science and Technology Group.
Yep.
Yes, I had responsibility for the task force.
Okay, so you've been leading the task force for how long?
I've been leading the task force since August last year, but the task force was created prior to my arriving in the department.
Okay, and so what happened in August last year? Was this when the discussion or the engagement started with PSI?
No, Senator. The process by which we became aware of PsiQuantum actually started way back in March 2019. That's the first time Austrade recorded their interaction with PsiQuantum.
Yep.
And then following that interaction in March 2019, in September of 2021, Austrade introduced PsiQuantum to the Global Business and Talent Attraction Task Force. That task force had been announced by the former Minister Alan Tudge.
Yeah.
And I can keep going through the timeline from there if you would like.
Okay. So were you involved with the original legal contract with King of Wood?
KWM, yes, Senator, I'm aware of the contract with KWM, who were first engaged on the 24th of July 2023.
24th of July, did you say?
Yes, 2023.
The discussion was around the date that the contract was published on the website on Ostender, but the engagement was a few weeks prior to that.
Now, we discussed this with Ms Richards this morning.
That's correct.
Yeah, okay. So were you involved in that engagement with KWM?
It was a few weeks prior to my starting, Senator, but I can call Anthony McGregor to the table, who is involved in the engagement of KWM.
G'day. So, Mr McGregor, is it?
Yes, Senator Anthony McGregor, Head of Division Technology Investment Task Force.
Okay, so you were involved in the original engagement?
Senator, that's right. My team was responsible for the procurement of...
Okay, and so you were working in the legal branch at the time?
No, Senator, I lead the task force at Technology Investment.
You were working in the task force at the time?
That's right.
And the task force decided to go with King of Wood?
That's right, Senator.
And were there other lawyers considered for this engagement?
Yes, Senator, we engaged Kingwood Mallisons through the usual process for these sorts of procurements. We approached, or we rather approached a number of providers through the whole of government legal services panel and received responses which we assessed, and Kingwood Mallisons were assessed as the preferred candidate.
Can you confirm the original value of the contract was $282,000?
Senator, that's correct, but it's worth me clarifying some points in relation to that, if I might.
If you would like to add to your answer?
Just, that is correct. That was the initial value of the contract, Senator. The contract was entered into on the expectation that it would be a phased arrangement. In fact, the approach to market indicated that, and that was because there were a number of elements of the project at that point were not known, including whether the government would in fact proceed with an investment, and so we anticipated that the contract would have a number of phases and need to be, depending on decisions and depending on how the project unfolded, potentially need to be uplifted.
Was it made known to the legal firms that were tendering for the work that it was a due diligence contract?
Yes, Senator.
So it wasn't anything else?
No, there were other elements to the contract.
What were the other elements?
Give me a moment, Senator.
There would have been a scope provided, I assume.
That's right. Yeah. So the scope included providing assistance with due diligence. It included assistance on a range of other legal matters to support non-binding discussions with the company at that point. including legal issues associated with establishing an operation potentially in Australia at that point.
So what would you say was the primary purpose of this legal engagement?
So the primary purpose, Senator, was to support an initial phase of due diligence. That was a key focus of the first phase of the contract, and to support advice that was subsequently taken to government around next steps and whether to proceed with subsequent phases of the...
So as a contract for DD, it started at 282,000. Can you confirm that it's now 3.2 million?
Senator, the amount currently published on AusTender, that's right, is 3.28.
3.28. Okay. And it's helpful that you're here. So were you the point person with King & Wood at this initial phase?
I wasn't the contract manager, but I was having regular engagement with King & Wood Mallison, that's correct.
Okay. And so was this part of a directive from the Minister to engage with PsiQuantum?
So I might just step back and take you through the process so you understand where this fits into the broader due diligence process. So as my colleague, Ms Wilson, mentioned, the first engagement between government and PsiQuantum was back in 2019. It stepped up towards the end of 2022 and then through the first half of 2023 there was a due diligence stage. We sort of think of it as a due diligence phase 1, which was joint between ourselves and Queensland, where we did the first phase of due diligence. And then in June, we stepped up, subsequent to a government decision, to commence more intensive discussions with the ecosystem and PsiQuantum. So from June 2023, we had a more intense kind of process. And then further towards the end of the year, we had another step up when you go into more technical and more detailed due diligence. And then after subsequent decision-making of government, we moved into detailed contract negotiation and legal form document drafting and all the rest.
Thank you.
So the steps that we sort of took were the same as the ones that Ms Mannon outlined earlier for the NRF, in terms of all the phases you would do for a due diligence process. And at each stage there's a collection of information, a series of questions evaluated, decisions taken, which may be to stop or to proceed. And so this phase, in June 23, there was a step up from the previous phase, which required us appropriately to draw on external support, both King Wood Mallison's in terms of legal advice, but also commercial advice, probity advice, and technical advice on the actual technology.
24 July, the contract with King & Wood starts.
Yes.
That's the evidence we just heard.
Yes.
So at that time, was it known to you that there was going to be a contract with PsiQuantum?
No, it was not known.
You didn't know at that stage. You were doing DD in case there was going to be a judgment.
That's right. We had been asked to engage in non-binding commercial and confidence discussions.
Okay, so when was it known?
When was it known that we were
there was going to be a judgment made that the Commonwealth would go with PsiQuantum?
So the government announced their investment decision on the 30th of April, and in February we had confirmation from the government that they would like to progress to that level, which was jointly with Queensland.
So 30 April was the decision?
No, the decision to...
Announcement, sorry. When was the decision?
Announcement was 30 April. The decision was the decision to invest, subject to final negotiations on detailed term sheets and contractual issues. There's always a subject to finalise, cross T's and dot I's, etc., was in February 2024.
Yeah, what day?
I don't have the date with me, actually. I'd have to kind of check the precise date.
February 24.
Yeah.
Well, I imagine it was after 15 February.
Highly likely, given those estimates and we didn't have an agreement at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so sometime after February, but before... Sorry, sometime after 15 February and before 1 March, there's a decision made to go with PsiQuantum.
Yes. Subject to
Subject
final
to-
negotiations and various...
All the usual things.
All the usual things, which
Yeah.
were, things that we would due diligence in terms of project schedules and a whole bunch of quite technical commercial negotiations in a complex deal of this size.
Okay.
We're also
That's
negotiating, Queensland was also negotiating alongside, so there
Yeah,
was
great.
issues that different investors and how we proceeded was separate and joint, depending on the strategies.
Okay. So that tells me that from 24 July 23 until February 24, there was engagement with PsiQuantum through King and Wood Mallesons.
Engagement was led by the department. We were supported.
At least. Sorry, can I finish the question? So we know that there was engagement with the department. Department engaged King and Wood. They engaged with PsiQuantum for 7-8 months. And what happens in those 7-8 months?
So I just want to clarify, most of the engagement was with the department was leading the discussions. We brought in appropriate others to the party. It wasn't the default that the lawyers dealt with PsiQuantum directly. PsiQuantum had their own lawyers at various stages, and lawyers talked to lawyers. But this
Very
was
very expensive business.
not unusual for a process of this complexity and importance. We've certainly, as a department, spent more money on legal advice in other processes. We were very cautious about appropriately using taxpayers' money in terms of phasing it out. But you asked about what had happened between what date and what date. I'm happy to give you those details.
I think...
Secretary, if I could just a point. You mentioned that the department approached others to the party. Did that include any other quantum computing organisations or expertise?
So yes, I've previously given evidence about an expression of interest process that was run in that phase as well between June and September, where we tested the market as is consistent with the Commonwealth Investment Framework and as is consistent with the PGPA Act in terms of expenditure of Commonwealth money. So we undertook either EOI or market testing process where we tested both domestic and international companies about their capabilities and their preparedness to offer similar outcomes. And so that process was running through this period as well.
Okay. So when did the EOI start?
You're talking about the EOI from others. So we commenced the internal work in June and it went out, just double check on the...
June 23.
Well, the actual process opened on the 11th of August.
Yeah. But there was an internal process to government to craft the EOI, to do the work about who to approach, what methodology we would use, what would be the questions that we would put to companies, how we would run it. So that happened between June and August, and then it was open for people to provide their information, and then we had an assessment process.
Okay, so while you're doing the EOI, you've spent $2.7 million on legal fees with King of Wood on due diligence with one provider.
No, that's not accurate. So,
well, how much did you spend up until February then?
So the EOI process and assessment, it closed in September, and we did the assessment subsequent to that.
But sorry, the tender documents say here that you'd spent $2.7 million by February 2024 with King of Wood Mallesons.
So by the end of, by the 10th of November, the legal support was 994,000.
We're looking at the same document that we tabled this morning.
Well, double check. I'm looking at the sort of schedule of contract negotiations.
So I'm looking at one which starts at 294, then goes to 814,000, then goes to 994,000, then goes to 1 million, then 1.1 million, then it goes to 1.1 million, a bit more, then it jumps to 2.7 million.
Yes, at the end of February.
And then it jumps to 3.1, and then it jumps to 3.2, almost 3.3.
That's right. And so you are asking about the EOI process, which happened.
No, I was asking about why you were spending millions of dollars on legal fees with one organisation while you're running an EOI.
So the EOI process, as I mentioned, started internally in June, and in terms of open to the people who were invited to participate on the 11th of August, and it went through until, double check, it went through to September, and then we had an assessment process. So that was the period of EOI.
Okay.
So
Well, let me
I
ask
think
you this
like
then.
for like, it's about $1 million. Some of that, some of the money that we went with Kingwood Mallison was also used as part of the EOI process.
Okay. How many other organisations that provide quantum computing services racked up a similar bill as PsiQuantum in terms of a DD process?
So I'm not sure I understand your question.
Okay, so did the department expend $3 million on another quantum computing organisation in a due diligence process?
So
or was
we-
it only PSI?
So some of that legal fees supported the EOI process as well, in terms of the structure and the questions, etc. So that funding kind of went to both the EOI process and the market testing, as well as the consideration. And a lot of the questions we were examining at that point would be irrelevant to which company was actually taken forward, because we were asking questions in terms of shaping commercial negotiations or considerations for the Australian legal system. So there was a range of questions, as Mr McGregor said. Some of them were due diligence with the company, some of them were legal questions that we had to ask her in terms of a policy consideration.
Okay, thanks, Secretary. Well, Mr McGregor, when you were engaged in this initial component back in July 23, how many quantum organisations other than PSI were you engaging with legally?
So just to check that I understand the question, Senator, are you asking how many companies were approached through the EOI process?
No, I'm not asking about that. I'm asking you, in July last year, you knew that there was an interest to have a DD or have some preliminary legal discussions with PSI, which is why you engaged.
And a market testing process. We knew
Right.
those both at the same time.
You would understand. I'm just trying to get the information from Mr McGregor here. So, were there other organisations that were in the mix at that time that you were engaging with legally in the same way that you were with PSI?
Senator, that was one of the purposes of the EOI process, to identify whether there were other companies that would proceed subsequently.
Okay, so there was one, and then there was an EOI to see whether there might be more.
That's right.
Okay, so we already had one in the mix, and they obviously had the inside running because you were already legally engaging with them.
We'd undertaken some initial due diligence.
Yeah, okay, so that's where it all started. Okay, so then effectively, is there any other record that you have of the department spending money like this on any other quantum organisation through this evaluation process?
So, as I said, the funding, the legal services were provided to the department for both the EOI process and the discussions with PsiQuantum. So they were together. So in that sense, you could draw the bow that they were supporting others. If you're referring to other processes, I can take it on notice, because we also The previous government supported SQC in terms of investments. And
I'm not asking about the previous government.
You asked about previous quantum investments. So
All I was asking was, in this last period, since July up until now, has the department engaged any other organisations and been through a DD process as the department has with PsiQuantum?
The outcome of the EOI process was that the government decided to move forward with PsiQuantum because that was the assessment of.
Well, they had the
process.
inside running back in July.
Well, that's just a...
That's the evidence.
No. That's your lazy pejorative, which is both unfair and incorrect. The department has patiently explained to you how this process worked. I'm sure they're happy to do it for as long as is required, but that is not the case, and it is totally appropriate if you ask a question about previous decisions the department has made. To go back and refer to indeed some of the grant processes under the previous government in relation to quantum computing, where significant allocations of funds were made, not as equity and loans, but as I think almost $1 billion in grants tipped
Back
out
to
the door.
politics, are we?
Well,
Back to politics.
Well, I don't think that's fair. I'm asking for you to ask your questions and listen to the answers, and not engage in the sort of lazy pejoratives that we just heard.
All right.
I appreciate the paternalism.